Good afternoon. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth lecture in the series called Free Markets, Individual Liberty, and Civil Society. My name is Steve Slattery. I'm Executive Vice President at the Fund for American Studies. Our organization, TFAS, sponsors this lecture series in partnership with Senator Rand Paul. It is made possible by the generous financial support of the Einhorn Family Foundation. This lecture series is now in its 8th year, and it attracts more than 1,000 interns each summer from the House and the Senate, from Republican and Democratic offices, and also from many other organizations across Washington. Our goal for this lecture series is always to have speakers who are truly provocative, speakers who are willing to challenge the status quo, and speakers who present positive solutions to our nation's most serious problems. And the problems are many, whether it's $1 trillion that are being added to the federal debt each year, or a corrupt justice system that sends innocent people to prison, or a foreign policy that engages our nation's soldiers in endless wars with uncertain objectives. To introduce today's speaker, it is now my pleasure to introduce the man who inspired this lecture series, a courageous senator who's never afraid to challenge the status quo, a man who understands and respects the Constitution, and a leader who has inspired countless young people to go out and start the brush fires for liberty. Please join me in welcoming Senator Rand Paul.
Thank you all for coming. I think we've got a great speaker today. I don't know about you, but I get tired of turning on the television and every ex-military man usually, that's on there that's retired from the military, is like, oh yes, now we need to do this war next, and this war after that, and we're done with that, we'll do this war. There doesn't seem to be a reasonable, rational approach from many of these people on TV. But the person I'm about to introduce to you, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis, spent 21 years in the Army. He works for a group called Defense Priorities, which is very much a nonpartisan group, has people from the right and the left in it, but a group that wants to have a more realistic foreign policy. He got 2 Bronze Stars, so he served admirably, he served in combat in at least 4 different theaters. And I think there are a lot of thoughtful people in the military who've seen, combat up close and personal, who really do think that our leaders should think through how important it is when we go to war, that war is the last resort, that it's one of the most important decisions we make. And I think there's not enough of that goes on, and not enough people on television talking about the devastation of war and how careful we need to be to avoid unnecessary war. One of those good voices, I think, for a realistic foreign policy is Lieutenant Colonel retired Dan Davis. Thank you.
Introduced by a senator. That's quite an unusual thing for me. Thank you very kindly, sir. I'm very honored to be here. But I think the bottom line up front, I think we need to understand is we have to be ready to use the military all the time. So we have to make sure everybody from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, everybody knows that we're ready to bring that hammer down at any point, because if we don't, wait, if we don't what? Why should we do that? That's what everybody says. Like the senator was talking about, you turn on the news anytime. This is a bipartisan bill. It doesn't matter, CNN, Fox, MSNBC. It seems like everybody's always telling you why, my God, we have to be ready to use military force here, because if we don't, they never actually finish that sentence. If we don't what? Because the implication, without ever actually having been said out loud, is that if we don't, then some bad thing's going to happen. But, I mean, really, Iran is going to be like the Nazis, the Wehrmacht, and roll all across the Middle East and capture everything. I mean, they can't even roll out to their motor pools. They're lucky if they can even turn their tanks on, frankly. So they're actually no threat to go anywhere. And then you look even at Russia, because a lot of people say, look, they took the Crimea, they are involved in the Ukraine, and by implication, if we don't put more force over there, if we don't show more people in Poland and the Balkans and everything else, they're going to roll across Western. Okay, they're not. They're not going to. It doesn't matter if they want to. Maybe Putin's sitting there thinking, dang, if only I could have the power that the USSR had, that would be swell, and then maybe he could actually think about it. but they don't have a fraction of the combat power that the USSR had, and it's not even anywhere comparable to the combined might of Western Europe and Central Europe, and of NATO specifically. So it doesn't matter if you want to, but if you don't have the ability to, you're not going to. So if we want to say that we're always afraid that they're going to do this, and we have to do more and more and more, all we're doing is ending up provoking them and making them afraid that we're going to attack them. Because I'll just point out, the Soviet Union, Russia, has been invaded many times by the West over the last 100 years. So they actually have a real fear of being invaded. And when we move closer to their borders, we actually heighten that tension. And then, of course, you've got China, and I mean, if you don't examine it, you're afraid, goodness gracious, they're going to come, I don't know, to Hawaii maybe, somewhere. No one ever talks about that part again. And we always talk about the A2AD, and we have to be able to, the anti-access area denial, we've got to be able to overcome that. But if you actually think about what that means is that we want the ability to be able to go and invade China anytime we want to. When you look at their force outlays, when you look at their R&D, everything is designed to defend their country from external attack. It's not, like the Nazis were in the 1930s, where they were having offensive weapons capabilities by the USSR. It had offensive weapons that were designed to move forces forward. Sorry about that. They were designed to project power. China's not like it. China's designed to extend its territorial water, extend its defense off its territorial waters, and defend from there. So at least at the moment, things could always change. But right now, they're designed to prevent us from attacking. They're not threatening to attack anyone. By the way, China's history over thousands of years, they've also not invaded other people, but they have been invaded. So they have a fear of that too. And when they see us moving ships through their territorial waters or up to it, and talk about having defense pacts with people around them, they are afraid of that too. So of course they're going to increase their defense spending. So these things have cause and effect. And that kind of gets to one of the things that I want to talk about here specifically today. And that is, what's underneath all of this. So we used to have foreign policy called realism. That's what it was during the Cold War. And that's where you took the world as it was, you look at all the pros and cons, and then you came up with a rational foreign policy that was designed to protect America. Made a lot of sense. We don't do that anymore. Some people may use that word, but what we really have is a policy of fearism. You have to be afraid of everybody. You have to be afraid of China, afraid of Russia, afraid of Iran, afraid of North Korea, afraid of Venezuela, afraid of Cuba. I mean, I'm not making these things up. I'm not being hyperbole. These are things that over the last several months you've heard people in the highest levels of government warning about. Literally, that went during the Venezuela situation. You had the National Security Advisor talking about how it's, those Cubans are all the ones that are causing all this trouble. Like, there's these, 10-foot tall soldiers. Look, I've been to Cuba, and they can barely even keep themselves fed. They literally have to walk most places or on bicycles. They don't even have taxis in some of these cities. They just have bicycles. They aren't a threat to anyone. If there's some existing in that country, there is no threat to the United States. And so if fearism is the cause of many of our problems, because it never answers that question, if we don't, then what? And that's one of the questions, if you don't get anything out of this, ask that question every time you hear these comments about we have to fill in the blank. Because what? If we don't, what? What is the fear? What are we afraid is going to happen if we don't take this military action? Like right now, everything with Iran is certainly taking center stage. There's constant talk about how we have to be ready to use the military force. We have to have all options on the table. And if they don't, then we have to be ready to take action. But if we don't, then what? What if we don't attack Iran? Is Iran going to attack us? I'll tell you, many people say that, but again, when you look at their capabilities, they have some pretty good missile capabilities. They have some good ability to cause a lot of trouble in the Straits of Hormuz. But just think for a second, would they actually, unprovoked, launch an attack and do any of those things? Because if they do, they know for sure that basically gives us license to do anything we want. Because nobody in the world would say anything against us for defending ourselves if we were attacked. because part of the UN Charter, everybody has the right of self-defense. They know that, Iran knows that, their mullahs know that. So they know that the last thing they want to do is give us an excuse to use our overwhelming military capability. Because there's nothing that they have that we couldn't dominate times 10, times 100. And so they're not going to do something that would certainly result in their destruction. They're trying to stay alive. And so they're doing many things in the area, and look, let me just say it out loud, in case you were wondering. No, I'm not an apologist for Iran. They do many bad things. They do some horrible things. I've got some friends whose families were brutalized, some whose family members were murdered by this regime, and they just detest the regime. And I certainly feel for that. And there's many others that are still there that are suffering right now. So there's no apologies for this, and there's no claim that they're good people or anything else. But when you're talking about American foreign policy, it has got to be focused on what is the benefit of our country. How do we preserve our national interest? How do we preserve our freedom? How do we preserve our ability to economically prosper? Those are the things that have to drive all of it. Because we want to, some people who don't like Iran and say we should use military force against them or threaten it, are talking about how, they're the state sponsor of terror and they do all these things. Look, we just got to say this out loud too. Saudi Arabia, they have murdered Khashoggi, we know that. They imprison and detain foreign heads of state when they don't do what they want to do. They actually beheaded some teenagers earlier this year, one of which because he tweeted the wrong thing. If we're going to still do business with those people that do those kinds of things because it's in our national interest to do so and we're not going to regime change them, then that needs to apply to more places. We've got to have a consistent foreign policy in how we behave and treat people around the world. And look, I'm as much as anybody about saying, hey, we should do everything we can to help people, to promote democracy and freedom and support those that we can. But there are limits to our power. There are limits to things that we should do. There's many things we would like to do. There's many outcomes we would like to see. But in order for us to effectively take care of our interests first, because it has to be America's interests first, that's why our military exists. Our military does not exist to keep the global commons open for other nations, to defend shipping going through the Straits of Hormuz, to attack the Russians if they go beyond a certain point. That's not the purpose of our military. Our military is to defend you, to defend the constituents of the offices that you represent. And so we should not be doing anything where we're going to sacrifice the men and women from your state that defend our country. They should not sacrifice their lives for the benefit of another country. They shouldn't. They should defend themselves for you and for their fellow citizens. And that's what we should do. And if we had our military focused on how it's going to defend our country and how it's going to defend us against any attack, then we are going to be in a really good shape. Because instead of fearism, what I think we should go to, the foreign policy we should have is what I call constructive realism, to kind of distinguish it from the Cold War time. Because the Cold War was a very specific situation. The geopolitical situation was very different, radically different than it is today, both with the formation of NATO, with the situation in Asia, South America even, and certainly in other parts of the world. Things are radically different today. At the end of the Cold War, Russia was a shell. It's no longer a shell. China, in a Desert Storm, they were, quite a bit backwards. They still had a conscription army. They have now developed, and now that they have developed an economy that's, starting to be on par with other great powers. So the conditions are very different. So we need a foreign policy that reflects the current realities. And here's the current reality. This is good news for our country. We still have the most powerful military on the planet. Without question, we do. There's things you can do to be better, but just compared to anybody else, we still have the most powerful military. Now, as long as we don't squander that, as long as we don't use it in places where it's not even needed for our security, we're going to maintain that. What you need to know is that this military is strong enough to deter anyone from launching an unprovoked attack. Russia's not going to attack the United States because they know that the response will be overwhelming. It could be nuclear if necessary, but even conventionally, we can inflict a a horrible price on it. So they're not going to do something they know would cause them. China, the same situation. They're not going to attack anyone because they have nothing to gain by it. That's one of the hallmarks of constructive realism, is that you have to look at each situation in the context where it exists and not just look at it one-sided. We do that too many times. We just look at it through our own lens, and we don't even consider what the other side thinks, what their history is, what they've endured, what's happened to them in the past. We don't even think about those things. Some people say, oh, we shouldn't have to. We should just look at it from our perspective. Well, if you want to succeed, if you want to have an effective negotiation in anything, whether that's negotiating a price on a house, on your car, or a nuclear issue with Iran or North Korea, you better be looking at it from the other person's perspective as well. Our bottom line objective is always, how is this going to benefit our country? It should be. It better always be. But you're not going to succeed. You're not going to get things that are good for your country if you're not also looking at the other side and being willing to have a win-win situation. Now, for a lot of people, that's an apt way. You're saying that Iran should be able to come out of this agreement with a win-win, or North Korea with a win-win? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because if they win and the threat of war goes down, that is a huge win for the United States. So if we're willing to say, all right, what's your bottom line? What do you actually have to have out of this? And then let's see if there's room for us to negotiate. And they'll list some things. Well, we can't really do that, but we can do this. So let's work on let's agree with where we can. Now then, let's work on the other ones with the intent to lower the reason anyone has to use military force. And then we have less chance to have to use our military. Now, what does that result in? That results in less antagonism to your major competitors with Russia and China. Now then you can maybe be a little bit more focused on diplomacy. You can be more focused on getting good trade agreements, on making sure that China does the right things, working within the WTO or whatever organizations we have, or whatever methods that we may want to. So let's just work on some things. And again, to the extent that we can, let's look for a win-win, because that always helps our country. If another country doesn't feel threatened, then they're less likely to ever launch an unprovoked attack. I mean, it just kind of makes sense. And if we have the opportunity to expand our economic business throughout Asia, even potentially with Russia, and we don't have to worry about constantly patrolling the Middle East and constantly sending troops to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen at all, because our security is not threatened there, then you can see now we don't even have to spend as much on the military. We can have a more powerful military, meaning our deterrent capability is higher, our security is greater, and our freedoms are increased. I mean, all the things we say we want to get, that's the way we get it. We get it through constructive realism, to where we take advantage and understand the world the way it is, knowing that it's going to be messy, chaotic, and sometimes it'll have outcomes we don't like, that sometimes people won't do what we want them to do, and that's got to be okay. Because when we have a situation where we think that, look, everybody has to do what we want, it has to work out the way we want, it's not going to, and by trying to do that, you're guaranteeing failure. And my goodness, I mean, almost across the board, our foreign policy has just been horribly failure, because you see terrorism increase, you see threats that we have to defend against increase, and certainly we're not able to lower the military footprint anywhere, or we have enough, we have not able to. But that's the result, and we still have all these problems with China, all these problems with Russia, you know, even now North Korea is starting to possibly gin back up, and certainly with Iran and some other places. And we can avoid much of that because it's within our power to do so. And our country benefits when we lower the tensions across the board while never blinking on defending our country, our interests, and all the people who live in your districts. So that's the real message I want to get. We don't have to have a situation where we're constantly on the threat of war. We should have a strong military that, without any question, will always be able to defend ourselves against any threat. But the opportunity that we have to have more trade, to see more freedom around the world is enormous, and it's within our power to have it. And that's what I think we should go to. So with that, I'll open it up to some questions.